Español,
Latino,
Hispano,
Chicano,
or whatever I call myself.
I look the same.
I feel the same.
I cry and sing the same.
I am the masses of my people.
and I refuse to be absorbed.
I am Joaquin.
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 The odds are great.
But my spirit is strong.
My faith, unbreakable.
My blood is pure.
I am Aztec Prince.
And Christian Christ.
I shall endure.
Like the aforementioned Joaquin in Rodolfo Gonzalez's iconic civil rights era poem, Chicanos Por La Causa has endured for more than 5 decades to be the voice and champion of the people it has represented since the late 1960s. And what began as a small contingent of student activists taking to the Phoenix streets to protest for a better education turned into the birth of an organization that has become an agent for positive change locally, nationally, and globally.
Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres.
Means in English to me is that tell me who you hang with and I'll tell you who you are.
Around the country, in Texas, California, Colorado, there was a whole new movement, and they called it the Chicano movement, that was going into the high schools to motivate students to want to improve their education a lot. And walkouts, blowouts were happening, particularly in Texas and California.
Mexican-American students across the Southwest, including Phoenix, began protesting by conducting organized school walkouts in 1968.
We're supporting the walkouts by getting people to demand their rights. It was well known that the students were not getting the proper education.
When you talk about infancy and Chicanos Por La Causa, you're talking about infancy in Daniel Ortega. I was but a sophomore in high school when I got involved with a group of students from Arizona State University who were with an organization named MASO, Mexican American Student Organization. And a lot of them were coming on to the campus at Phoenix Union High School trying to create interest in young people like myself to go to college, to go on to a university. But in the process of trying to motivate us to go to college, they also had the desire to get us to join them to fight for equality.
In the case of many professors, I was probably thought as a communist and worse. And that is one of the reasons why we have so much cariño with Terry Cruz. Terry Cruz was one of the very first persons that we talked to, and she accepted us. And she was a little older than we were at that time. But she gave credibility to a lot of people that normally would not associate with being Chicano. And so it was easier for the organization to get more credibility amongst that group of people.
Student organizers from Arizona State University and Phoenix Union High School were motivated and inspired by national events like the Vietnam anti-war protests and the civil rights movement led by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. They were demonstrating against academic discrimination and racial injustice. Mexican-American students were forbidden from speaking Spanish in the classroom and on school grounds. And they were being pushed to pursue trades, not college.
It was very difficult to integrate into the school program, into the school curriculum. And sometimes we were outcast because, first of all, we were Spanish speaking. And secondly, a lot of the public schools didn't really accept us being there.
As a young man, I was very proud of who I was from an ancestry standpoint. I was Mexicano. I was very proud of being a Mexicano. my parents, my food, my music, just the whole cultural aspect of who I was very proud of. But I never really saw the inequities that I was facing, because you have to remember that if you live in a barrio, you're all the same. To recognize discrimination, I would have had to gone outside of that. And I didn't really recognize it for what it was. And when these students, these people, some of which were the founders of Chicanos Por La Causa, came onto the campus not only to motivate me to want to go to college, but they also began to talk to me about how things were not equal and what it is I could do to make things better for our community. And they were very simple messages that really combined well with, you need to get an education, young man. And the reason why you need to get an education is because we have lots of issues in the community that need to be dealt with people who have educational backgrounds. And that really inspired me.
At that point, I started realizing, hey, wait a minute, they're right, you know. We don't have enough Latinos at college. We don't have, our kids are dropping out. And we have been discriminated against, and I didn't even realize that.
You know, I was aware of the movement. In fact, I had a small carpet business at that moment. I already had a family. So I was into tracking the news like everybody else was, and obviously driving by Immaculate Heart, where all the students had gone. And on top of that, one of my brothers was at Phoenix Union High School. I was very, very close to watching the actions that were taking place. And away from that, I was already interested in the movement. I mean, that was part of my youth. I was always talking about helping create a Chicano organization that would take on the issues of discrimination and so on. Especially since I experienced that, especially with my father, how they discriminated against him on promotions. And so it was close to my heart, and I think it was to all of us at that era, you know, that generation of us.
They woke up a sleeping giant in Phoenix.
The organization at that time, younger people, we called ourselves Chicanos. Most people in other organizations did not like the word Chicano.
My father, for one, would say, do you know what a Chicano is? You know, what are you doing joining Chicanos Por La Causa? I had supervisors in state government when I left DES to go work for Chicanos Por La Causa. Do you understand that it's a militant group that you're going to work for?
Even my mother said, ¿Qué es eso de Chicano? He said, that's a real low-grade, you know, name. And he said, más pachuco. We said, that's a movement, Mom. Es un movimiento. She said, no, es una palabra muy baja.
Arizona State University students and community activists began finding their voice and the courage and determination it took to organize and fight against injustice. They were inspired now to seek out basic rights to end years of neglect in their barrios, decades of abuse in their jobs, and years of intolerance and a lack of opportunities to give their children access to a quality education.
In 1967, when I first came to Phoenix, I worked for the Arizona State Civil Rights Commission as a field representative. And this was during the time that there was a lot of movements taking place. There was a civil rights movement. Cesar Chavez was organizing in the fields. Jody Lopez and Rosie Lopez and others were meeting in the community. So it was a great time of social discussion and social interaction of the plight of our community. And in the 60s, in 1967, quite frankly, is what gave birth to the organization of Chicanos Por La Causa.
As the 70s began, Chicanos Por La Causa began championing the concerns of farm workers. Many of CPLC's leaders were the children and grandchildren of farm workers. They had first-hand knowledge and many times experience what it was like to have to travel with the seasons, working from crop to crop.
In view of how the farm workers, migrant community traveled, the crops dictated our lifestyle. And the owners of the crops dictated our homes. If you would have a very small shack, if you want to call it that, to our standards now. And going to school was really an experience that was not very good for the children. Going back to my mindset, I think I went to maybe 12 different elementary schools. Consequently, I could never tie into either the educational process or friends or have any support because we had to move again, and we just kept moving.
It's only when Cesar started talking about the working conditions. We worked 12 hours a day for as low as 60 cents an hour, 7 days a week. And so it's very difficult, and under every condition, weather condition there is. The farm owners oftentimes did not care about the conditions.
Yes, Cesar lived here in this room in Santa Rita Hall, which was the first building and office of Chicanos Por La Causa. And this particular room is where Cesar Chavez had his 24-day fest.
The Santa Rita Center was a small chapel built by parishioners of the nearby Sacred Heart Church, east of Santa Rita, in what was known as the Golden Gate Barrio. The neighborhood roughly bordered 16th to 20th Street, from the railroad tracks to Buckeye Road.
Growing up here was, a life that I think everybody should have had. You could go out and run around any hour of the day, any hour of the night, and the neighbors would take care of you as children. They would watch over you and take care of you. It was, I think, part of life that I think a lot of people don't see anymore, where you actually knew your neighbor. You break bread with your neighbor. You go to church with your neighbor. You pray together with your neighbor. And those are the things that we got to live firsthand, an experience that a lot of people will never experience.
The people in the Church of Golden Gate had evolved over decades and generations and had begun organizing the people to improve their community and those barrios nearby.
The community members came from Sacred Heart, from Golden Gate, from Campito, from Cuatamipas, from Green Valley, St. John the Baptist, all the different neighborhoods. And they were the community representatives on CPLC's board.
You have all this activity going on right now. It already is there. Many of the people who lived here were part of that farming community, So you have students who are ideologically getting involved with Cesar Chavez. You also have the veterans community. You see all these things that are coming together. And so when the students from ASU show up, they got a base. I mean, it's no accident, that CPLC, Barrio Youth Project, which basically headed the student boycotts in 1970, Valle del Sol, all come from Sacred Heart Parish.
Chicanos Por La Causa's role in the Chicano movement began to grow in numbers and strength because of the synergy with the Golden Gate community and its parish. It was the beginning of a strong partnership fueled as their barrio grew in the shadow of the city of Phoenix's growing downtown. In the 70s and 80s, the city declared eminent domain and began raising the Golden Gate neighborhood to expand Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. It displaced nearly 6,000 Latino families, leaving behind only one prominent red-bricked symbol of resistance.
But when we wanted to tear down the church, that just struck too close, because that's the memory of your families, of the origin. That's the connection. The power of the bureaucracy is to outlast the opposition. They didn't count on us outlasting them. So tell me, who has the political and economic standing to assure that this place is saved? Not only saved, but maintained in a respectful manner. CPLC has that.
Why was it so important for us, right? That neighborhood was displaced because the FAA wanted the city for the airport, right? Sacred Heart was built by our community because in those days we couldn't go to the other churches like St. Mary's Basilica. So we built our own church. And after all, everything was gone, the church was still there, and it's still there today. So why do we stay here? It's because this is where we come from. And I want to make sure that we don't forget where we come from. And we need to invest in our communities.
I've spent 48 years of my life in this fight, in this struggle, in this movement. And all the elders, including my dad, spent more years than that. So until they died.
Do you think your dad would be proud?
Yeah, I think he's very proud. Praying for all of us, really for all the elders that are gone. I think this is what it is. It's for them.
The alliance between Chicanos Por La Causa, the Barrio community, and the Phoenix Roman Catholic Diocese arose again in 2017 after the Phoenix City Council approved a deal to preserve the church and develop land around the property.
You know, we have 60 buildings throughout the state of Arizona. The bulk of them are still here in the barrio where we started, and where we go invest in, we go work in those neighborhoods that nobody else wants to go invest in. That's how we make change, right? We have to be willing to be those pioneers, if you will, to go back in the neighborhoods and provide those opportunities. You know, one of the blessings that we have is for 30 years we've been trying to get Golden Gate community back by the airport. And the great news, after 30 years and multiple RFPs and challenges and different mayors and different council people, we finally got the vote. As we go into other communities like Nevada that we're in now and New Mexico, the bulk of our investment's going to be in the barrios and the neighborhoods that need the investment.
And one of the best parts of the whole thing is kids started the organization and kids are running it. It's incredible how this little organization that started in a tiny little room and now to see what it has done, how it has grown, how many thousands of people we've helped. I'm very proud to be a part of it.
Everybody and anybody who walked through the doors, that was her child. It was a child that had the courage to come in asking for help, and there was no way that she would ever tolerate that individual being disrespected, that individual not being served. In many ways, she was really the conscience of the organization, right? You know, she was the individual that made sure everybody stayed humble, that everybody knew why is it that they were there, you know, as, you know, part of CPLC.
Terry Cruz was already in her mid-30s when she became one of the early founders of Chicanos Por La Causa. Her life experience and wisdom was something that the younger students and leaders of CPLC would need to serve the community. As a result, she was the one that got after them when it was necessary. And short of throwing chanclas, many saw her as the matriarch of Chicanos Por La Causa.
I remember Terry more after I left Chicanos Por La Causa, because after you leave CPLC, Terry would hunt you down and say, okay, you're at such and such place and you do this. I have a client and they need this and that's what you do. So I'm going to refer them to you, not ask you. I'm going to refer them to you and I need for you to take care of them. And when you're finished serving them, you call me and tell me what you did. It didn't matter where you ended up. Terry would find you and she would make you do something or sponsor something or be involved in something that she thought you ought to do. And believe me, we did it. I did it. You know. I think that's among many of her specialties. I think that Terry made everybody realize that you could serve and be humble too, that you were not any better than, that you were not more powerful than. You just had a unique opportunity to be of service, and that's what you should do, and that's what was expected of you. She had many traits that I admire, and the older I get, the more I hope I'm like her in terms of just having that quiet power, quiet ability to bring people in and to, you know, have some ability to make a difference, to be part of change.
As it relates to the CPLC family, was a matriarch. Steadfast, always keep you focused, never let you go astray, reminding you all the time that you were there to serve, not to be served, reminded you of your moral and social obligations to the community, to your family, to your children. She was my boss, walked in my office whenever she wanted. She didn't need an appointment. I wasn't that important. When I was chief of staff to Governor Babbitt, she'd walk in my office, didn't believe she needed an appointment. And Terry was just always a true advocate of what CPLC mission is, her strong faith in her Creator, in her God, in our community, in hope for the future, made her the woman that she is. And that's why it was, I believe, easy for Terry to live her life with such grace and dignity, even at the end. She worked right up to the end.
As the need to raise funds to bring about change got stronger, Chicanos Por La Causa turned to the guidance and support of the Southwest Council of La Raza, which provided $10,000 for CPLC to support its work. The Southwest Council of La Raza would eventually become the National Council of La Raza. Joe Eddie Lopez was chairman of the board and recruited Ronnie Lopez as CEO of CPLC. The mindset and strategy of Chicanos Por La Causa began to evolve from being just a grassroots organization seeking a revolution to becoming a community change agent for a forgotten brown-eyed population getting ready for its own evolution.
We were all just going together, understanding that there had to be a better day in dealing with institutions and systems. And it wasn't so much creating change for a individual. We wanted to create systemic change of institutions. I can recall Danny Ortega being on the Industrial Commission, and Danny Ortega, by getting a rule passed, eliminated the short hole in the migrant fields in the state of Arizona, so no longer anybody had to bend over. And then he passed another rule that said that the fields were a workplace. And what that meant was there had to be water and a place for men and women to go to the bathroom. That's systemic change. That was the debate. That was the discussion.
As new leaders began to take the reins of Chicanos Por La Causa, Tommy Espinoza used an example from something from his own life to create some of the biggest changes for CPLC at that time.
While I was in high school, my father was a laborer for the utility company, Arizona Public Service here in Phoenix. He was going for a promotion. Well, I saw Dad go through 2 iterations of applying and being rejected. And the excitement around the table when he was going for this foreman position. Well, the last time he was rejected, the look on my dad's face caused me so much anger because I knew that he felt defeated. He didn't say that, but his comment was, well, I'm just not going to apply for this, you know. And to make matters worse, an Anglo friend of his had told him, look, they're never going to make a Mexican a foreman around here, so why are you trying? And he had trained this guy to become a foreman. So it was, you know, all the way around it was wrong. At that moment, it changed my life. From that point forward, I said, I'm going to change this.
Chicanos Por La Causa was already a corporation before Tommy Espinoza began his tenure as CEO.
The organization was run very well, and it always has had perfect audits, by the way, in the history of the organization. But I knew that we needed a shift to more of a business model. And at that moment in time, there was what was called the Community Development Corporation. So we had a decision to make. If we were going to become a CDC, we needed to change our board of directors to some degree and our mission. So we set up the corporation Chicanos Por La Causa that it had 4 districts and 1 position that was elected from the whole group. And the remainder of the board members were then appointed. So you always had 51% elected and then the remainder appointed. I picked the appointed board members to be business, bankers, attorneys, folks that could help us think through business models. I always knew that our mission was to serve the Chicano community, so I didn't have any concerns about advocacy because that's what we were all about. I took an advocacy organization and converted it into a community development corporation that had much more of an economic development approach to it than just the advocacy. Not that we stopped advocacy, because we kept doing that, but it was a different form of advocacy. We were at the boardrooms now advocating. We were at the governor's office. By then Ronnie Lopez was at the governor's office. We had positions. That first wave of CPLC was much more geared to the political. It paid revenues for me when I became president of CPLC, because we had these various connections in all parts of the city, the state, and the county. So we all evolved off of each other to some degree.
Chicanos Por La Causa's new board of directors was made up of those who worked, lived, and raised their children in the barrios that surrounded the CPLC offices.
Chicanos Por La Causa was a little nonprofit that could. We were developing, we were finding probably our identity as the kind of nonprofit that we needed to be and that the community needed and that would best serve the community. We were getting into spaces that we hadn't been before. We'd never been in workforce development, but we signed up for workforce development, and even today the CPLC still has a very strong component of workforce development. We signed up into the space of housing development. Art Portillo, who was our first housing employee, really made a big strides for Chicanos Por La Causa in the housing area. They built homes, they developed a counseling program for people who were in default and delinquency, and many of the things that were new and experimental at the time are still in place today.
I always had a dream team. I want to be clear about this. I always had intelligent, bright people around me, much smarter than I was, but by the grace of God, I knew how to treat them. So we were able to have a dream team that moved projects that no one ever dreamt about. The first apartment complex for the elderly and handicapped, 300 and some units. President Carter's mother came out to cut the ribbon into construction, I got invited to the White House dinner by President Carter with Lopez Portillo, who was president of Mexico, the first meeting of a president from Mexico to meet with the president of the United States. Graciela Olivares, I'm not kidding myself, that's the one who moved that agenda. But Graciela behind the scenes was moving things for Chicanos Por La Causa that we could have never done because we didn't have that kind of influence back in those times.
I was part of that transformation, part of making that happen, doing the knocking on the door to have community events and talking to the community, reporting back to the community in terms of what the goals and aspirations were, and just building, the support that we needed. CPLC was very fortunate to have in their history some very strong supporters, some people who understood what community development was all about at a federal level and who knew that this was a great place to make an investment and have tremendous impact. Tommy Espinosa, as our president and CEO of Chicanos Por La Causa, had great relationships with the Ford Foundation, built great relationships with Graciela Olivares, who was in the White House serving in a cabinet level and able to make things happen for many, many communities throughout this country. And we were at the right place at the right time, but believe me, it was not just a fact of being there, it was an effort of working hard and making sure that we delivered on those things that were asked of an organization that was in transition at that time.
I always knew instinctively that if we didn't have an economic base as a community, we wouldn't have a voice. Because politics comes and goes, And the other is that I learned early in my career from Congressman Udall that Republicans and Democrats, neither side really cared about Chicanos. So I had an experience where I went to Washington to go after a grant. And I went to Congressman Udall, Mo Udall. And I remember the first question he asked me, he says, "Are you here as a Democrat or are you here representing the Chicano community?" And I remember telling him, "I'm here representing our community. I could care less about the Democrats or the Republicans." He said, "The right answer." He goes, "Because you can only move things for your community if you understand who you're serving." He goes, I can't help you, but Congressman Rhodes can, who's a Republican. At that moment, I think he was a minority Speaker of the House. So he picked up the phone, called Congressman Rhodes, and I literally walked over to Congressman Rhodes' office, and he helped me get a $150,000 planning grant, which in those days, this is now in the early 70s, was a lot of money, which really allowed us then to create the community development model that we created. So those were lessons. The other is that, back to Graciela Olivares, President Carter appointed her the first Latina cabinet position to serve as the director of the Community Services Administration. So that put Chicanos Por La Causa in a direct position with a presidential appointee. She was the first major grant we got, and we're talking about millions of dollars now. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands. She gave us her first initial, I want to say about a $5 million grant to Chicanos Por La Causa, which then really shot us out as an economic force in Arizona.
Opportunities arose because of the federal government and leadership in the Democratic Party and leadership nationally as well. Now there was new money coming in so that organizations could use the money from the federal government to create change for working class families, for those who are disadvantaged, as the word was used then. And yes, there was money to improve the life situations of families who were undergoing so many ugly strains of poverty and lack of educational opportunities for advancement for their children.
Tommy believed CPLC should not be funded by just one funding source. His vision was bigger, because the things Chicanos Por La Causa wanted to do with the extra resources was bigger. Money from the grants went towards home building projects. In all operations, there had to be a connection to providing for community needs.
One of the things that I always used to tell my team that would come around me, if you're here after 3 years, shame on you. You should learn everything you can about community development, about politics, and then you should go on to better positions and let me help you get there. Because the more network we have, on top of everything that was created before me, then we're just going to grow in power and influence throughout the state of Arizona.
I think besides all the physical structures and all the programs that we've developed, I think the leadership and the way we've changed the attitude of how people look at Latinos in Arizona, and if you look at the landscape in Arizona, the leadership is there.
Pete Garcia was known as the big dog because he didn't stay on the porch. He always went out and brought it home.
Pete had great ideas, somebody that was always thinking of ways to improve, of ways to have impact.
People would gravitate to him, period. He was a hustler. I'll give him that. I'll give him his due on that.
Pete Garcia began his tenure as head of Chicanos Por La Causa in 1982. During his years as president, he brought CPLC's asset base from 15 million to more than 155 million. Not bad for a guy who grew up just a stone's throw away in Phoenix's Marcos de Niza housing projects. But from the beginning, he was never your typical CEO.
There was always a light around him. He never forgot where he came from. He'll tell out from the projects down the street.
Early on, when I started working, for Pete, and Pete would travel, and he would come back from those trips, and he would have cocktail napkins, and he would have a bunch of scribble, on this cocktail napkin, right? And he would give it to you, and here's a business plan. And you look at this like, how can this be a business plan, right? But then you look at the notes that he had written, right? He was bringing you back a business concept that either in a discussion with somebody else or him sitting at an airport had written down. There's very few people that can do strategic thinking before that word, even became, commonly used, right? But that's just the way he was.
In the 80s, the city of Phoenix was exploding. By capitalizing on Phoenix's rapid growth, Pete and his staff began laying a foundation, practicing strong fiscal responsibilities while at the same time working on aggressive fundraising strategies. It helped CPLC survive federal cutbacks that took out so many nonprofits back then.
He was very progressive. He had spent a lot of time in DC and he knew how the federal funding system worked and he used that very effectively.
When Pete saw that many multifamily developments were being sold, he worked with underwriters and financial institutions like Fannie Mae to preserve the housing by packaging several thousand units together with complex financing. It was an $83 million bond financing transaction, and it helped preserve the housing stock for working families and generated additional income for CPLC's general fund and programs.
I was recruited by Pete Garcia, who had this brilliant idea of bringing the future, exposing him to CPLC, and just getting him hooked. I think he knew in the back of his mind, God rest his soul, that once he got CPLC in people's blood, they would be connected for life.
Well, I never served under Pete as a CEO, but I did get to know him and I got to work with him in other ways. You know, Pete was a very direct, open person. He would just, very much like Terry, but probably a little more brusque, he would say, Elisa, I have this person and they need that, you know, and you need to do this. It was not a question, it was like, you need to do this. And you know, of course. But it was always for the right reason and it was always for the right purpose.
And I think the thing about Pete was that he grew the organization immensely, probably greater than any, and of course his longevity had a lot to do with it. But it was his selflessness that I think was most symbolic. Quiet in the background, very people-oriented, with very strong administrative skills, but with a strong connection to the community and the desire to really serve. I mean, if you look at Pete's background and his humble beginnings, he understood what it was Chicanos Por La Causa had to do to serve the community because he was one of those kids. So Pete left a legacy that represents the best that we had to offer, who understood poverty, who understood the importance of education, who understood what it takes to not only run an organization, but to grow an organization and still remain his simple, humble self in a way that was very motivating and very heartwarming.
He took the organization to a new level. Pete touched so many people, right? Anytime I'm on national boards now, I travel to other places, and the person that everybody remembers is, hey, who was the president? Bigger than life guy, and I go, Pete Garcia, yeah, Pete Garcia. And you know, that just tells me that, you know, his legend lives on, and in me, his mentorship and his trust and belief in me is something that I'll never forget and always honor.
Since its inception, Chicanos Por La Causa has been considered a place where community leaders are cultivated, a leadership tree with lots of healthy raíces. In the 80s, a branch of the CPLC tree was planted in Tucson, and it produced Lorraine Lee.
When I first started working here, she was a grant writer. So we just started working together. And it wasn't that close of a relationship until she was appointed. And all we had was each other to rely on.
A native of Tucson's South Side, Lorraine Lee was of Chinese and Mexican descent. She knew firsthand the pain of discrimination from two sides, and it helped her set a foundation for her deep commitment to being a catalyst for social justice and change as an executive vice president for CPLC.
She had a vision, and she wasn't, no matter what obstacle was placed in front of her, she was just not going to give up. She would find a way around it, over it, under it, whatever it was, she would find a way to get what she needed, because her philosophy, you have to do the right thing. It's the right thing to do. And she had to make folks understand this is the right thing to do. And so she had that passion, that fire, and that fire in her belly to try to, you know, get what she thought would be the best thing for our community.
Throughout its existence, Chicanos Por La Causa and its community programs and leadership have been recognized nationally and internationally, from housing to education to jobs and everything in between. They have been hosted by and been host to presidents and dignitaries from all over the world, all recognizing what CPLC has been able to do.
Chicanos Por La Causa was always viewed as a very prosperous, a little bit of a risk taker, if you will, you know, in terms of its foundation and entrepreneurship. You know, was one of the key words, right, that we always acknowledge, you know, even going back to the mid-'80s. When I took over Chicanos Por La Causa, it was really at the beginning, you know, of this last recession. And so we had to find a way to reinvent ourselves, not only to continue to be relevant and to sustain ourselves, but really to be able to expand the capacity and to be able to expand beyond what we had inherited as a team.
CPLC made national headlines for the innovative ways it used grant money to help those affected by home foreclosures and abandonment during the Obama administration.
The recession was happening. Some people call it the Second Depression. The government had the Recovery Act programs, and one of them was with HUD, which was the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which was to deal with the bad foreclosure crisis that was happening, especially here in Arizona. We were one of the poster childs across the country. And so we were bold. We said, you know, we were working with an association that Pete Garcia helped found called the National Association of Latino Community Asset Builders that focused on building economic opportunities and housing opportunities for the community. And when this program came out, it was the second round of this money, NSP, so NSP2, as we call it. It was when Secretary Donovan at the time wanted to test whether it was more effective and efficient to work through nonprofit collaboratives to get the money on the streets sooner. There was a lot of criticism of the Recovery Act money, that it was taking too long to get into people's hands, going through the governments and the cities and all that, which was true. It was just too much bureaucracy. So he said, let's cut that. We'll go directly to these nonprofits who are doing it every day. And so we received the second largest award in round 2, which was a little under $138 million. And at that time, and I think today, I'd have to research it, but it was the largest ever single award to a Latino coalition. So that was history. But what I'm more proud of is that, so we work with 13 other Latino organizations across the country and 13 others. We were in California, New Mexico, Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, DC, Pennsylvania, Texas. We were coast to coast and including ourselves. And what I'm more proud of than being the largest single award Latinos, that we led the nation, period, in leveraging and recycling those monies. That program technically has been done for a while, but it's still alive for us, and we just got a recent report that we lead the nation in recycling the money. Because that's the mantra for CPLC, right? It's not a handout, it's a hand up.
When President Barack Obama came to Phoenix in 2015, he was still dealing with the after effects of the Veterans Health Administration scandal. Despite that, President Obama made a point of scheduling a meeting with Chicanos Por La Causa.
So we had Secret Service. We had to be in one of the houses that we were going to show him. And they said, you guys, they were telling us exactly where do you stand, and you don't do this, don't do that, you know. And then like 5 minutes, the president is coming, get ready, right? So I had for security and those types of things, but man, was that a roller coaster ride. So then we see the caravan coming right, and that's impressive, right? You know, it's just a huge, with all the vans, with the press and everything. And so he gets in the house and he comes in, and of course he introduces himself, you know, Barack Obama, of course, we know who you are, Mr. President, we know who you are. And then we got to sit in the kitchen of the house and show them some plans of what we're doing and how this work, how NSP work. You know, and Secretary Castro was like, yeah, this was a group that just really knocked it out of the park and have leveraged the dollars. And we explained, we gave him a lot of details, which was impressive, about how we made the loans, got loans, repaid them, and all the process, right? So we're done, we get to take the pictures inside, and he was very complimentary to me and Inmundo. He says, you guys are great leaders, and obviously very impressive what you guys are doing. Clearly, I know why you guys are successful, which was very humbling. So we go outside in the front lawn where they took the picture, and that's the Secret Service says, once we go outside the house, you guys step away. And then we're starting to walk out, and we start to walk away. He goes, no, come come. And of course, we didn't hesitate, right? Even though Secret Service told us not to. We walk over and we get to take the pictures, and that's where I get the jokes, because I'm one of these vertically challenged people, short guy. And in the picture, right, and even the lawn's kind of like this, so I even look even shorter on that. But he comes in, he mentions our names, so I was impressed. He remembered our names. Then he remembers some of the details and talks about how we did this thing. And, I was just so impressed and how approachable he was.
In the current political climate, the days of presidents who are, well, presidential seem like a million miles away.
Is there any place that's more fun to be than a Trump rally?
Hey, defund, hey, defund, hey, defund, hey, defund, hey, defund, hey.
Today, it appears that racism and discrimination that my parents had to endure is coming back. I still think we can beat it. I still think we can push it back. But we need Chicanos Por La Causa, today more than ever, to fight back in every realm of our community.
It's openly blatant racist against our communities. And it's made others that maybe were on the bubble of being racist now openly racist against our kids, against our community, and against our activities. And so what Chicanos Por La Causa started on is getting a better quality of life for the farm workers and for the poor communities is even more important today.
I think CPLC has to be the watchdog to try to calm that down and be the agency that people can feel safe with. And the community needs CPLC more than ever because there's always a need for resources. There's always a need for families. We get so many people still calling us for rental assistance, food assistance, utility assistance. It just doesn't go away. Homelessness just does not go away. Mental health issues will not go away. And therefore, we have to stay strong. We have to stay strong for them. So, we are needed out there for our community.
Chicanos Por La Causa was started by a group of people from the barrio that were truly there to serve the poor, and especially back in those days, a group of people that were being abused and misused and discriminated upon. CPLC should never lose sight of that. Regardless of how big financially, how many buildings, how many assets, if you lose that part of the heart of the institution, then we failed, all of us, because then we're not doing the job that our founders of Chicanos Por La Causa wanted when CPLC was created.
This morning, a lot of little brown kids went to school hungry. A lot of kids went to school today and don't have the expectation to being the best. It's be average. People go to work today, brown people, who make less than anybody else or don't get promoted because of the color of their skin or their last day. As these things happen every day to one of us, it happens to me. Because some of those folks don't have the financial, political, or freedom and luxury to stand up and say that is wrong. So if it happens to them, it's happening to me. And I have a responsibility and an obligation to stand up for them. Because if not, who'll stand up for me? If there is a parent that gets deported today, that's me. If there is a child suffering today, that's me. That's my granddaughter. It's me being a part of something greater than myself. And for someone who's been so blessed and so touched, I have an innate moral and social responsibility to be the voice for change.
A sizable number of Chicanos Por La Causa's current staff and executive leadership weren't even born 50 years ago. But for many, it's important to remember the past and what's behind and in front of 50 years of empowerment.
We all want CPLC to be successful. What's always in our back of our mind is our history of where we came and where we want to go. And we never want to forget that. You ask any board member, and that's what their top of mind is, that history. For a lot of the younger people out there, they don't know our history, but first you got to know where you came from in order to know where you're going. So that's what I want first and foremost, is to people know that history of how important it is to us.
In terms of what's going on in our history, Chicanos Por La Causa has come full circle.
Chicanos Por La Causa started as a result of an educational movement. Our focus is to open the doors for our students. That education is a pathway to a successful future. And that's where the advocacy and empowerment on behalf of CPLC comes in educating our community and acting as our voice.
Its role as community watchdog, advocate, change agent, and cultivator of leaders remains a constant.
Today in K through 12, Latinos are the majority population. Let me repeat that. Latinos are the majority population in K through 12, and what does that mean looking forward? It means Arizona is headed to a minority-majority state. That's where the community is going. So when we look at our community, an investment in the Latino community is an investment in Arizona's future. The Latino community is successful, Arizona is successful. Often we talk about what we advocate for is, well, that's a Latino issue. No. What we advocate for are safe neighborhoods. What we advocate for are quality educations. What we advocate for are access to capital. That's what everyone wants. Our values are American values. They're no different than anyone else. We just want to make sure that all communities have that opportunity to get the piece of the American dream that we all want to pursue.
After 50 years, Chicanos Por La Causa's fight to help others achieve that American dream is still not over. It is still fighting for new young voices. It is still fighting for dreamers. It's still fighting for the next generation of future leaders. Future leaders that are partial to the wisdom and examples of the past.
You can't do it on your own. So realistically, if you're going to go into community development, if you truly want to serve the community that you claim, you have to surround yourself with people that are committed to serving the poor, committed to using their best skills possible that God has graced them with, and to be willing to share their knowledge with others. You know, sometimes we have a tendency of thinking that if we allow somebody else to grow smarter than we are, you know, you're giving something up. Our team here is reverse. You know, I believe that if the more you give, the more they get to grow, but the more important thing is the more services you get to give to the community that you're serving. So I go with a dicho, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. That what you learn in the barrio, what you learn in your home, what you learn from your abuelita, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres, all those little sayings are part of who you are. And if you're lucky enough to get in a position where you get to use those skill sets, as I was fortunate enough, those barrio lessons pay off.